Ever taken a walk in the early morning hours just to find someone or something is following you? Something you cannot see. Ever get cold chills for no apparent reason and feel as though you have stepped out of body and cannot explain why? Ever feel a strong presence in the room with you when there was no one there but you? No one human, that is. There are many stories that the paranormal people have shared that will take you down these roads. So sit back, relax, turn down the lights, and get ready for some spine-tingling twists and turns that will have you running in horror, screaming to your mommy.
I'd like to start this story by saying that I knew or had always heard how animals and babies can see things that us as adults are unable to see. I'm talking about in the spirit realm. Having said that, I would like to proceed by stating that we have two cats. The oldest, his name is Felix, and the baby is Gizmo. Gizmo was relaxing with me and Scott, that's my husband. We were watching TV one evening and Gizmo was perched on Scott's chest, as that's one of his favorite spots. Scott was doing as he normally does, just kind of rubbing his head and not really paying too close attention to Giz. Just watching TV basically. When suddenly Gizmo began to act or react in a very odd manner. He had been stretched out in a laying down position, so at this point he sat up on Scott's chest and started looking around Scott's head, back and forth, all around, as though he was searching for something, or trying to keep up with something. Then he would pat on the pillow around Scott's head. He would softly touch Scott's face, his chin, touching around his ears, all the while staring and watching with his head constantly moving around as though he could see something flitting about. Sometimes he would move his head with very quick motions, following something. Then he would stop and just kind of watch back and forth, above Scott's head. Then he would follow whatever it was across the room, back over to where Scott was, then over to the left, then back to Scott again. Once he was back to Scott, he would just sit there and glare. Then he would start patting again. At times his head was cocked to the side like a little puppy, seriously intrigued with whatever it was he was seeing. Claws were not out, but he would repeat this patting at and around Scott's face. Then he would just stop and stare. This process went on for a few minutes with all the back and forth stuff. Finally, he just watched whatever it was go up and around the room and apparently out the door of the room we were sitting in, because he just sat there staring and facing the hallway. Scott and I sat there silent, with our mouths hanging open, looking at each other in total disbelief, basically scared stiff, and at a loss for words. Unfortunately, that is not the only time this type of thing has happened. Since then, there was another occasion with Gizmo, never with the older one, at least not so far. This incident started in the kitchen. Gizmo came in and sat right at my feet where I was standing at the sink. I turned away from the sink but was leaning back on the counter as I was drinking a bottle of water. Giz stood up and slowly began walking to the middle of the kitchen, glaring toward the front door. Then he began to follow something. So he went around the corner and, mind you, I was kind of tiptoeing right behind him, trying to not disturb or disrupt what was going on. As he continued to watch this invisible entity, still following whatever it was down the hall, He then sat in the hallway and just watched toward the living room for maybe 10 seconds or so, then proceeded into the living room and began looking around as though he was searching for this thing. I stood in the hallway frozen, watching to see what his next move might be. He continued to look around for another minute maybe, then plopped down in the middle of the room and began playing with one of his toys like nothing had happened. I continued to stand in the middle of the hallway, not knowing which way to go or what to think. I know I was scared to death. And just as I was about to run upstairs and grab my cell to call Scott, there was a very loud knock on the front door. 4 boisterous bangs that pretty much stopped me in my tracks and made me want to turn and run the other way to the basement and hide. Boom, 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 boom. It honestly sounded as though someone was pounding with their fist. I stood there petrified, waiting for the next set of hits on my door, but all was silent. I stood in place for a few seconds, collected myself, then decided to proceed, with caution, to the door. I slowly stepped up and peered through the peephole. I blinked a few times, making sure my eyes were clear because I could see nothing. The porch light was on nice and bright, and it was just getting dusk, but there was no one there. So I said, "Yes?" No response. I waited a few seconds and repeated myself. Still, no response. So I stepped over a few feet to the right to peek out the window. There was no one there. So, without giving it much thought, I flung open the door just to make 100% certain, and still absolutely nothing. There was no one there. If there was something there, I couldn't see it. All I felt was a very chilly breeze out of nowhere. The breeze seemed to go right through my bones. A slight shiver came over me, and I'm standing there thinking, it's 82 degrees outside. What is really going on here? So I snapped out of my semi-shock state, closed the door, feeling very ill at ease, needless to say. Too frightened to move in any direction, but knowing I had to get out of the house, as I was not at all comfortable being home alone after Gizmo's incident and now this. Scott was working mandatory overtime and would not be home for another 3 to 4 hours. So I ran upstairs, grabbed my purse, cell, and keys, and got the heck out of there. After I was safely in the car heading out of the driveway, I called Scott and explained everything to him, and then I'd meet him at the house when he got off work. I've talked to a couple people that suggested perhaps it might be a good idea to get the house blessed, including all entryways. I'm actually wanting to just pack up and run, but we just purchased this place less than a year ago. And what is really odd to me is I've never experienced anything out of the ordinary here at this house until lately. The incident with Gizmo and Scott occurred around 3 weeks ago. And now today, this. Not really sure what is going on, but I do believe I'll try getting the house blessed first before I go into total panic mode. If anyone has any other suggestions, please send them into Dirt and Poo. Thanks for listening.